She was my best friend's mom, the kind of woman who made silence feel safe, until the day she looked at me differently, and said, "Lock the door, let's break some rules." It started on one of those afternoons that didn't feel like it would matter, the kind where the world is calm, the air is warm, and you're just passing through moments without thinking they might change your life. I had only gone to return a book I'd borrowed from my friend. Nothing more. But when I rang the bell, it wasn't him who opened the door, it was his mother. She stood there, framed by soft sunlight pouring through the hallway window. Her hair was tied up loosely, a few strands falling across her cheek. There was something calm about her, the kind of calm that doesn't come from silence, but from strength. "Oh, he's not home right now," she said, her voice gentle, familiar. "But you can come in if you'd like." I was just making tea. I almost said no, out of politeness, maybe out of nerves, but there was something about her tone that felt welcoming. So I stepped inside. The house smelled of rain-soaked flowers and fresh lemons. The faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere filled the space between us. She moved gracefully, not like she was trying to impress anyone, just herself. She asked about college, about how life was going. Her questions were simple, but the way she listened, it made me speak more honestly than I'd planned. Her laugh came easy, soft but warm, and when she smiled, her eyes carried the kind of kindness that makes you want to stay a little longer. At one point, she was arranging a few lilies in a vase. A petal fell, brushing against her wrist, and when I instinctively reached to help, our hands met, lightly, unintentionally, but it felt different. Her skin was warm. For a moment, neither of us moved. I looked up, and she did too. The air between us shifted, quiet, unsure, but charged with something I couldn't explain. She smiled again, softer this time, and said, "You can stay for tea, he'll be back soon." But as she poured, her hand trembled slightly. And in that small, almost invisible moment, I realized something had changed, not just between us, but inside me. It was the kind of afternoon you never plan for, but somehow remember forever. After that afternoon, things started to feel different, though nothing was ever said aloud. She texted me a few days later. "Nothing unusual, just, your friend forgot his jacket here. You can come by and take it if you want." I knew it didn't really matter whose jacket it was. What mattered was that she reached out. When I arrived, she was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring something on the stove. The air smelled faintly of cardamom and baked bread. She smiled when she saw me, that same gentle smile that made time slow down. "Tea?" she asked, and I nodded. We sat across from each other at the table, the steam from our mugs rising in soft curls between us. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, making tiny golden flecks dance across her face. It wasn't the kind of beauty that asked for attention, it was quiet, natural, the kind that felt safe to look at. She asked how my studies were going, how life was treating me lately. I told her about my plans, my confusion, the feeling of being stuck between boyhood and adulthood. She listened, really listened, her chin resting lightly on her palm, eyes tracing every word. Then, she started talking, about her own life. About how time moves too fast when you're not watching. How sometimes, you forget who you used to be before responsibility took over. There was a tired softness in her voice, not regret, just a kind of wistful honesty. I didn't interrupt. I just sat there, taking in every word, every pause. I noticed how she brushed her hair back when she was deep in thought, how her laughter carried warmth even when her eyes seemed far away. At one point, I made her laugh, genuinely. She looked at me across the table, and for a brief second, something unspoken passed between us. Something that said we both feel it. When I stood up to leave, she followed me to the door. She reached out to take my empty cup, our fingers met again, softer this time, slower. Neither of us pulled away. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Thank you for the company," she said. And as I stepped outside, the cool evening air couldn't quite erase the warmth her touch left behind. That night, I couldn't stop replaying her smile, over and over, wondering if she was thinking about mine too. It was a Friday evening when everything quietly shifted. The sky had turned gray, heavy with the promise of rain. My friend had gone out of town for a few days, and his mom had texted me earlier, "Could you check the fuse box if you're free? The lights keep flickering." I didn't think twice. I went. When she opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the soft glow of candlelight flickering in the hallway. "Power's out again," she said, smiling faintly. "I've already accepted defeat." I laughed and followed her inside. The sound of rain had begun to patter against the windows, steady and soothing. The air felt cooler, closer. She led me to the fuse box, handing me a small flashlight. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, light, familiar now, but still enough to send a quiet jolt through me. "You're a lifesaver," she said softly as I fiddled with the switch. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The power came back with a hum, lights flickering to life, but somehow, the room felt warmer before they did. I turned around and found her standing close, closer than before. Her hair had come loose, a few strands falling across her cheek. The candlelight made her eyes shimmer, soft and uncertain. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was just the rhythm of the rain, the faint ticking of a wall clock, and the sound of our own breathing, quiet, almost synchronized. "You should dry off," she said finally, her voice lower than usual. She handed me a towel. I took it, but when I reached for it, my hand brushed hers again. This time, neither of us moved away. Her hand stayed. Just a second too long. Then another. When she finally looked up, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't before, a mixture of longing and restraint. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words caught halfway. "We shouldn't," she whispered. The silence after that felt louder than thunder. I wanted to step back. I should have. But I couldn't. And then she did, gently, quietly, almost in self-defense. She turned away, drawing in a breath that trembled slightly. "Thank you for fixing the lights," she said, forcing a smile. When I left that night, the rain had stopped, but the storm between us had only just begun. After that night, we both pulled back, or at least, we tried to. Days turned into a quiet routine of pretending. I focused on college, on work, on anything that didn't remind me of her. But every time I passed her street, my eyes betrayed me. I'd glance at the house, half hoping, half afraid to see her standing by the window. She didn't text. And neither did I. It wasn't that we had promised to stay away, it was that silence felt safer than temptation. But silence has its own language. Sometimes I'd catch myself remembering small details, the way her voice softened when she said my name, the faint scent of jasmine on her wrist, the warmth of her laugh echoing in the kitchen. They weren't memories, they were hauntings. One afternoon, about a week later, my phone buzzed. Her name appeared on the screen. The message was simple: "I still have your jacket." I stared at it for a while, unsure whether to reply. But curiosity, or maybe longing, won. "I'll come by later," I typed back. When I arrived, the house felt quieter than before. She greeted me at the door, her smile polite, careful. The air between us carried all the words we hadn't said. "I washed it for you," she said, handing me the folded jacket. "Didn't want it to smell like rain forever." I took it, nodding, unsure what to do with my hands, or my heartbeat. For a moment, she looked as if she wanted to say something else. Then she sighed softly, glancing away. "It's strange," she murmured, "how someone can suddenly matter more than they should." Her honesty caught me off guard. There was no flirtation in her voice this time, just quiet truth. "I think about that night too," I said finally, my voice low. "More than I should." Our eyes met, steady but fragile. No touch, no movement, just two people standing on the edge of something they couldn't name. Then she smiled faintly. Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect to be real, she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The moment was too heavy, too honest to risk breaking with words. When I left, the sun was setting, that soft, golden kind of light that makes everything look tender and temporary. And as I walked away, I realized, distance doesn't quiet the heart. It only teaches it how to whisper louder. It had been weeks since we last saw each other. Long enough for the silence to settle in, but not long enough to forget. That day, she called. Her voice sounded different, softer, maybe even uncertain. Could you stop by? She asked. There's something I need help with. When I arrived, the house felt still, almost too quiet. She was in the kitchen, making coffee. The window behind her let in a thin beam of sunlight that traced the outline of her shoulders. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said, without turning around. I wasn't sure either, I replied honestly. She handed me a cup, and we sat across from each other, the same table where we had once shared laughter and shy glances. But now, everything felt slower. More deliberate. After a few quiet minutes, she finally spoke. You're probably wondering what this is, she said, her eyes fixed on the swirling coffee in her cup. I've been wondering the same. I didn't interrupt. She continued, her voice trembling slightly. People see me as someone who has it all figured out. A mother. A woman who doesn't make mistakes. But lately, I don't even recognize myself. I keep thinking about that night. Her words hung between us, fragile, real. I think about it too, I said quietly. But not with regret. She looked up then, really looked. Her eyes glistened, a mix of fear and relief. Maybe, she whispered, we've both spent too long trying to be what people expect. She paused, her breath shaky. Maybe it's time to stop fighting what feels right. There was a silence that felt almost sacred. Then, with a half-smile that carried both courage and tenderness, she said, lock the door. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. Why? I asked, my voice barely steady. Her answer was soft, almost a confession, because I don't want to keep pretending anymore. Not tonight. I turned the lock, the faint click echoing louder than thunder. But nothing wild followed. No chaos. Just stillness. She stepped closer, slow and trembling. Her hand found mine, fingers interlocking like they'd been waiting for that touch. She leaned in, her head resting gently against my chest. No words. No rush. Just two people who finally stopped running from what their hearts already knew. And in that quiet, the rules didn't break. They simply stopped mattering. The next morning carried a silence that didn't feel peaceful, it felt heavy. Not awkward, not cold, just full. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting faint lines across the floor. She was already awake, standing by the window, a cup of tea in her hands. I watched her for a moment, her shoulders relaxed but her expression distant, like she was somewhere far away inside her own thoughts. I sat up, unsure what to say. Every word felt too small, too clumsy for the weight of what we had shared the night before, the closeness, the honesty, the quiet surrender. She turned when she sensed I was awake. Her smile was faint, tired. You should have some tea, she said softly. It'll help you wake up. I stood, walked toward her, and took the cup she offered. Our fingers brushed again, but this time, neither of us reacted. It wasn't new anymore, it was familiar, and somehow even more dangerous because of it. For a while, we just stood there, side by side, watching the morning light spill across the living room. Finally, she broke the silence. We can't go back now, she said, her voice low, steady. I know, I replied. But I don't think I want to. She sighed, a sound that was part relief, part ache. You're too young to carry something this complicated, she said. And I'm too old to start pretending it doesn't matter. Her words weren't harsh, they were gentle, protective even. The kind that come from care, not regret. I don't see it as a mistake, I said quietly. I just don't know what to call it. She looked up at me then, eyes soft, wet at the edges. Maybe we don't have to call it anything, she whispered. Maybe it's enough that we both know it meant something. I nodded slowly. My hand found hers, not to hold her, but just to let her know I was there. She didn't pull away. Instead, her thumb moved lightly across my palm, tracing small circles that said more than words could. Outside, a bird chirped, breaking the silence just enough to make us both exhale. We didn't promise anything. We didn't plan for what came next. We simply stood there, two people bound not by rules or titles, but by a quiet understanding. Some connections don't fit the world's logic, but they still feel like home. Time has a way of softening things. The guilt, the confusion, even the ache, it all fades into something quieter, something easier to live with. Months passed. Life went on. My friend returned, classes got busier, and the world outside her house stopped feeling so heavy. Yet, every now and then, a small moment would pull me back, a scent, a song, a passing glance that reminded me of her warmth. We didn't see each other often after that morning. Not because we didn't want to, but because we both knew space was necessary. What we had wasn't meant to be lived loudly. It was something that existed between moments, in the pauses, the memories, the silence. Then one afternoon, she called. Her tone was lighter this time. I'm moving some things around the living room, she said. Could use an extra pair of hands, if you're not too busy. When I arrived, the house looked different, brighter, more open. She greeted me with that same calm smile, but this time there was no tension in it, no guilt hiding underneath. Just warmth. We moved furniture, shared coffee, and talked like two old friends who understood each other too well. She laughed again, not the careful, restrained kind, but freely, without fear of being heard. As we took a break, we stood by the balcony, watching the sunlight dance across the garden. She turned to me and said, "You've grown." I smiled. "You helped me, even if you didn't mean to." Her eyes softened. "And you reminded me what it feels like to be seen, really seen." The words lingered in the air, gentle and complete. There was no need for more, no promises, no future plans, no declarations. What we had wasn't about forever, it was about truth. Two people who met in the middle of loneliness and found something real, even if it wasn't meant to last. Before I left, she pulled me into a quiet hug, steady, warm, familiar. Her hand rested over my heart for a moment longer than it needed to. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "You too," I said. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, lighter, like something that had finally made peace with itself. And for the first time, I understood, some love stories don't need labels. They just need to be felt, once, deeply, and enough to change you forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, it helps more people find these kinds of stories. Tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who changed how you understand love, even if they weren't meant to stay? And if you want more stories like this, slow, real, and deeply human, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's a new chapter of love waiting every week.